Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking some time from your lunch hour to join us today to talk about the future office space of TRS. My name is Jarvis Hollingsworth, and I'm chair of the Board of Trustees of the Teacher Retirement System of Texas. This is my second time serving as chair of the TRS board. I was first on the board as chair more than a decade ago, so I'm very pleased to once again serve in this capacity. Just by way of background, I did grow up in a home where both my parents were teachers. My mother in law is actually a retired principal, and my wife is also a teacher. So the mission of TRS is very special to me, and I am personally invested in the important work that TRS performs. I'd like to welcome each of you to our first ever Facebook Live event on a very, very important topic. That is TRS's long-term facilities planning efforts, or as we like to call the project, moving forward together. Whether you're currently working in our public schools or enjoying your retirement, we want to engage with you and prepare for the future together. Know that as your representatives, the Board of Trustees takes our role as fiduciaries very seriously. We're here today to discuss an important decision that the board has weighed, the future of TRS's headquarters. I'd like to now introduce one of our other participants, my fellow trustee, Trustee James Nance. Trustee Nance.
Thank you, Chairman Hollingsworth. I appreciate being included in this conversation, and I'm very glad to be here. For those of you watching, I'd like to start by telling you a little about myself and my role on the board. First, like many of you, I spent a career in public education, working to improve our community. My wife Beverly and I have both been TRS members for 47 years, which is just about the time that TRS moved into the current offices at Red River. As a trustee, I represent the interests of all members, both retired and active. Many of you watching are on a fixed income and feeling the impacts of inflation. So any money spent out of the trust fund is of great interest to you. I, as well as my fellow trustees, understand that. That's why it's so important we are all informed of the decision-making process as we move forward.
Thanks, and that's right, Trustee Nance. We want this process to be as open as possible. And that's why we've been discussing long-term facilities planning publicly for several years at our board meetings. TRS Executive Director Brian Guthrie will be joining in just a moment to provide an overview of the proposal the board will be considering at our next meeting in September. But first, I'd like to talk a bit about the trustees' role as fiduciaries of the fund. Simply put, we are bound by law to act in only the best interest of the trust fund. So any decision we make, you can rest assured that we will have that duty first and foremost on each of our minds. While we've been talking about future office space in board meetings publicly, we wanted to move beyond that by hosting this Facebook Live event to meet you, our members, where you are here on Facebook. For today's event, we've been collecting questions through email, Facebook, and from the various employee and retiree associations. There are quite a few questions, but we're going to be asking some of the most frequently asked questions we've received. And our executive director, Brian Guthrie, will be answering those. But first, Brian, why don't you give our viewers an overview of the proposal?
Thank you, Chairman Hollingsworth, and thank you all for being with us today. It's certainly a pleasure to engage with our members in this way, to engage with all of you who are watching this event live with us today, or for those of you who may be watching it as a recording, because this will be available as a recorded video after we finish the live event today. So thank you for joining us. I know that you have many questions about what we're proposing, and they're very valid questions, which is why we thought this event was so important and why we're very much looking forward to laying out the proposal. But to start, I'd really like to talk about why we're here and why we're proposing new headquarters at a time like this. I mean, the fact of the matter is that we're out of space at our current locations. And when I talk about locations throughout this time together today, I want to make sure that you're clear. We're talking about two facilities. We have a facility in Red River, which is two buildings on the block of Red River and 11th Street and 12th Street. And we own those facilities. We've owned those facilities since the 1970s. In addition, we have lease space in which our investment division is housed, and that is a location downtown called 816 Congress. We've been leasing space there since 2009, when we first ran out of space in the current buildings that we own, and the investment division has been operating out of that facility for over the past, well over a decade now. So why are we here? Why are we talking about the need for growth and the need for headquarters space? And the fact of the matter is, if we look at how we've grown as a system over time, this really tells the story. I mean, you all know the statistic that 1 in 20 members, 1 in 20 Texans, the member of our system, but that doesn't tell the whole story. If you look at the bottom of this slide, you can really see what's happening. Our membership is currently at 1.7 million members. To put that in perspective, I started at TRS back in 2008. And when at that time, we had just under 1 million members. So we have virtually doubled our population just in the time that I've been here over the last 13 years. But in addition to that, as we look at how we project to grow in the future, these numbers are startling, and we expect to double or perhaps even more than double in size over the next 25 years. So you can see that as our membership grows, the services that we need to provide and the staff that we have available to provide them also needs to grow. And so at the end of the day, that's why we're having this discussion. Texas is a growing state. As more people come to the state, that means there's more kids and children who need to be educated, which means we need more schools and more employees of those schools. And so as a result, it's just a growing effect there. In addition, we have other programs that we manage, not only the benefits that we provide you for your retirement, but also we manage through healthcare insurance programs. And most important function, of course, is that we manage the money that's in the trust fund to pay your benefits. And that trust fund, as of the currently, is nearly at $200 billion. We are a worldwide global financial operation. In order to effectively invest that money, we need to have staff on board. So that's really the growth that we are talking about and why we're having this discussion today. Now, some of you may ask, well, how many people do you need to do a job like that? So let me be very clear about the number of people that we currently have providing these services. At the moment, we have just over 800 employees who are providing direct member services as well as investing the trust fund dollars. If you look at how we compare to our peers across the country, you can see by this slide that we are very, very efficient in how we provide those services. We have always prided ourselves to be the most efficient system in the country or close to it. But the bottom line is, with the unprecedented growth that we're experiencing, we have to have more people. And so that's why we are adding more people to provide better direct benefits to you, to provide better direct services to you as you retire and in your retirement, and also to manage the trust. We have had a very concerted effort in the investment division over the past several years to decrease our reliance upon external managers. Now, people have asked why we're doing that. And the answer is simple. We are trying to provide more money for the trust fund and to save the trust fund money by bringing those investment resources in-house. Whenever we or another institutional investor relies upon an external manager, we have to pay them a fee to provide those services. And that fee is almost always going to be more expensive than if we just hired someone with the same expertise to come work directly for us. And so that's what we're doing. We're bringing those resources directly in-house so that we can save on those management fees over time. That's going to be a huge boon to the fund, and it's already yielded benefits where we've saved nearly $500 million just in the past couple of years that we've done that. And we project to save more as we continue with that effort. But as we grow, as you grow, as the state grows, we need to provide those better services. And as a result, we need to grow as well. So that's kind of where we're at with the efficiency argument. But I also want to make another point. We've been talking about long-term facilities now for quite some time. And throughout that process, we have also gotten feedback from you, our members. And the two consistent points that you repeatedly made was, one, why do you need to be in downtown Austin? And the second question is, why are you leasing space? And so what I really find appealing about this option that we are considering currently is that we address both of those issues. Because this generational solution that we are proposing would move us out of downtown, and it would also get us out of the leasing business and get us out of the lease space in downtown. We'd be moving to a location called the Miller Development, which is in East Austin. It's several miles north of downtown. And it is located, for those of you familiar with the Austin area, where the old airport used to be located 30 years ago before the airport moved out to where its current location at Bergstrom. That has been a completely redeveloped area. It's a mixed-use area with both the residential and business use. And there is an attractive solution for TRS out there that we believe not only makes financial sense, but more importantly, serves you, our members, better. And so let's talk a little bit about that and really dive into the numbers, because at the end of the day, this is really the key. And this is why we're having this discussion in the first place. As Mr. Hollingsworth noted in his opening remarks, we are all fiduciaries of this fund. And so we must do what is best for the fund financially and what makes the most economic sense. And so we want to bring to you today the economic argument for why we are even considering this right now. So take a look at this slide. You can see at the top the two buildings that I talked about before. We have the facilities that we own at Red River, which are fully occupied. We have maxed out that space. They were built first in the 70s with one building. A second building came along in the late 80s, early 90s, and they were designed to be a 30-year solution for TRS, and they've served that purpose, but they're outliving their useful life. As part of that outliving that life, we actually had to start leasing space for our investment division, as I mentioned, in 2009, so well over a decade ago, and that's where our investment division has been located since. So as we look at this solution at Miller, what's appealing about it is that it gets us out of the leasing business and it gets us out of downtown. And we think that those are both significant benefits, not only for the trust, but also for our members. But it gets better in terms of the economics. And this is what I find really compelling about this particular idea, is that we can offset the cost of that building. We have negotiated with the developer, and we believe that the two buildings we are seeking to purchase in Miller would cost between $250 to $300 million. That's a wide range, but there's a lot of variables that still need to be nailed down before we can give you a very definitive cost. But we feel very comfortable that it's going to be within that range. So that's sort of the starting point. That's how much money that it's going to cost to purchase these new facilities. But there's an offset. There's three offsets that I really want to bring your attention to. First, we could sell our current buildings at Red River. We own them. They are our headquarters. They are an asset in the fund. And we believe that we could sell them for between $80 to $100 million. We could sell them for even more if some of the Capitol View corridor restrictions were removed on this building, but that's not a decision that we can make. That's a decision that the legislature would need to debate. Nevertheless, this is an asset, and it is a very valuable asset in a growing area. The Austin real estate market is booming right now, and as a result, we need to have a discussion about what we could sell this building for, and that's a conservative estimate of what we believe it could go for. In addition to that, if we were to stay at Red River longer term, there is maintenance that we would have to do to this building just to make it occupiable in the near term. We believe that those costs for the maintenance would run anywhere from $50 to $75 million. Again, that's a very conservative estimate. We want to be very conservative in the numbers we're showing you. We don't want to overstate this case, but the case kind of makes itself, even with these conservative numbers. The maintenance costs that we would put into the building would not increase the sale value. It would simply make the building usable for us or whomever would purchase it, and so would not increase the sale price. So that really is money that we would not be able to recoup through a sale if we were to do those maintenance over the longer term. And then finally, and most significantly, I mentioned that we've been leasing space at 816 Congress. We would have to renew that space, leasing space, if we were to maintain our status quo. We would renew that lease, and that is a cost that is basically money out of the fund on an annual basis. The current lease is about $5 million per year. That could go up to $6 or $7 million a year as the lease costs go up in this part of town. If we get out of that and we move our investment division into a building we own, which we could do as early as 2023 under this proposal, we would immediately begin saving on not only the lease costs, but we also have to pay taxes on those leases. And so we believe conservatively, again, the savings there could be anywhere from 120 to $140 million. So bottom line is the offsets pay for the cost of this building, but that's not all, because we're purchasing a building that will become an asset of the fund. And that at the end of the day is probably the most compelling reason for us to have consider this. We're not only offsetting operational costs that will pay for the construction of these buildings, but in addition to that, we will have a new asset that will be a benefit to the fund long-term and will grow in value, just like the assets here at Red River grew in value. We built these buildings in Red River back in the 70s and 80s for millions of dollars, not much more than that. And we're talking about selling them for 10 times that if we were to move. So we project the same sort of growth in the asset value for the new facilities that we will purchase, but we're not estimating that here. We're just showing you that it's basically a dollar for dollar exchange. If we purchase these facilities, they would become an asset of the trust and therefore would become valuable to the trust and would count towards the trust's overall value. So bottom line, the economics, we believe, really make this a compelling option for us to consider. That's why we're having this discussion. I know the timing for some of you doesn't seem like it's ideal. It doesn't necessarily seem like it's ideal to us either, but it's something that we have to discuss because of the growth and because of the long-term costs that we're going to incur. And we want to avoid those costs if possible with something that will actually add value to the trust long-term. So I'm sorry for spending a lot of time on that, but I thought that really it was important to really address the economic value of this proposal. One more thing I want to mention, Mr. Chairman, before I turn it back to you is there's additional benefits. And there's not economic benefits, but there's member benefits to the move. We believe that by moving to this new facility, we can improve the member experience. Members have already complained to us routinely about being able to access our building, the fact that the traffic pre-pandemic was very poor, and we project that the traffic to continue to be an issue moving forward. The new facility would have easy ingress and egress from major state highways, I-35 in particular. We are designing the buildings in a way that would allow members to easily access all of our member services and have a quality experience when they come visit us here at TRS. Now, I know that many of you have asked, why do you need to do this when you've been so successful providing benefits virtually and providing counseling virtually to members during the pandemic? And that's a great question. The fact of the matter is we were successful in doing that, but that's not our preferred member means of communication. We hear you loud and clear, members, that you want to visit us in person. And so as a result of that, we need to provide a facility that you feel comfortable visiting, that you feel comfortable accessing, and then when you're there, you have a quality experience. So technology alone is not really going to provide a level of service that we believe you as members deserve. In addition to that, I've mentioned some of the other benefits of making this transaction now. We can move and put Red River on the market at a time when it would be in high demand. We could support the business needs of a financial institution, again, that's nearly $200 billion in value and is a global investor. And the bottom line, and most important to me, it does not negatively impact the trust fund. In fact, it benefits the trust fund long term by making this kind of transaction, because we're investing in our future and we're not putting money out the door. We are actually putting money towards an asset that will accrue in value over time and benefit the trust.
Thank you so much, Brian, for that very thorough overview of the proposal in terms of the financial analysis as well as the analysis as it relates to our members, both of which are critically important to the success of our system. But now let's turn to, now that we have an overview of a proposal, let's turn to some of the questions that we've received from our members and address some of those directly. Mr. Nance, why don't you start us off, please?
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. The first question I have, Brian, is two-part. First part, will this impact the ability of members to get a future COLA increase? And the second part is a question that I've been asked quite often is, why isn't TRS advocating to the legislature for retirees to get a COLA?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Nance. And yes, I hear the same questions, and I really appreciate the opportunity to address those questions directly with our viewers today. So to take your second question first, we are statutorily prohibited as an entity from lobbying the legislature on behalf of our members. That was statutory changes that have been put into place over the past several decades, which limit our ability to advocate for our members. As a result, we can only serve as a resource to the legislature, and we try to do that to the best of our ability. That is why we attend every hearing. We provide estimates of costs on every bill that's being considered that would impact TRS. But at the end of the day, we cannot say whether we think it's a good or a bad idea because we are statutorily prohibited from doing so. So as a result, we can provide the numbers, we can provide the facts, and then we provide that information so that legislators and the decision makers can make a good decision about whatever bill they're considering. Now, to get to your first question, this would not in any way affect our ability to have a COLA in the future. That would, of course, take legislative action. That is not currently something that the special call legislative session that's in session right now is considering. They're considering the 13th check, but either way, any benefit enhancement would not be adversely impacted by this proposal. Again, we are taking resources from the trust and we are investing them in an asset that will continue to accrue in value. So there's no negative impact to the trust fund. It does not make us any less likely or less actuarially sound, to use a technical term. It allows us to invest and grow the fund. And so as a result, it would only make it more likely that we would have the resources on hand for the legislature to consider a COLA in the future.
Thank you.
Well, Brian, as we know, everyone knows we're in a pandemic. And first, as chair of the Board of Trustees, on behalf of the board, let me extend my sympathies to any of our members, as well as our staff, who've been negatively impacted in any way by the pandemic. And my hat's off to you, Brian, and the staff for having performed as well as you have virtually during the pandemic, with the majority of the staff working from home, or all at some point, and then as we've brought more folks back into the office. But it raises a point that I think is important to discuss. As you talked about earlier, given all things considered, we performed fairly well during the pandemic virtually, with the majority of the staff, if not all at some point, working from home. Doesn't that really prove that we really don't need more space, that we can make do with what we have?
So that's a great question, Mr. Chairman, and I know that this is top of mind for our members who are also impacted by the pandemic and how it changed. It changed all of our lives virtually overnight. And we were successful. And my hat's off to the staff for making such a swift adjustment. And also to our members for also being flexible and patient with us as we made that adjustment from providing in-person services and working in an office to working from home and providing virtual services to you. But that being said, we are not long-term going to be a virtual operation. One of the things that I did when the pandemic hit was I directed our teams to not only look at how we could successfully make the transition, but to determine what functions could continue to be done from home and what functions really needed to be done in the office. And we've had now 18 months of experience to figure out the answers to those questions. And the answers vary depending upon your function. What we've determined is that much like we've seen in schools, in-person education, hands-on education with our children seems to be much more effective for the vast majority of our children than actually learning virtually. The same is true for work. There are some functions that we do here at TRS that really lend themselves to cooperation, collaboration, and working together in teams. We're more successful, we're more efficient, and we deliver better benefits under that scenario. In addition, as I've already mentioned, many of our members have expressed a preference for visiting with someone in person, being across the desk from somebody to exchange ideas and talk about your retirement face to face, as opposed to doing it the way we're doing it, unfortunately, today, which is virtually. There's lots of advantages to virtual communication, and it's here to stay. So the other thing that we recognize is that even moving forward, as we perhaps adjust to whatever the new reality will be, that new reality will include some component of our staff working from home on a routine basis. The operating sort of mindset that I have about that is that once we get past the Delta variant, once we get back to something that's normal and post-COVID, about 75% of our workforce will be in the building on any given day, and the other 25% will be able to work from home on any given day. Now, I think that everybody who works for TRS is going to have to come into the building for some period of time, be that 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, in some cases, 5 days a week. It just depends on the function. But even at that 75-25 split, when we came up with that sort of assumption, we changed all of our projections for our long-term space growth and what space we think we'll need through 2050 or 2060 to accommodate the growth in population that we expect to see. And even at those reduced numbers, we came up with a need for a new headquarters, a new facility, and that's the Alpha Bravo solution at Miller, which we are talking about today, would be able to satisfy those needs at those reduced numbers. We lowered our assumptions. We took into account the fact that work from home is here to stay and that will always be here. And we think it's a valuable addition to our toolbox in providing benefits to our members. But at the end of the day, to provide the best benefits to you, we have to have people on site. We had some people on site who never left, even at the height of the pandemic. They had to come in every day because we still receive applications from members. We still receive paper. We are still several decades away from having a complete transition away from that. One of the things that I find interesting about serving such a diverse retirement population that we have here in Texas is that each generation has different needs. But as one generation has a different need, it just adds something to our toolbox. It doesn't eliminate the need for these other tools that we've always used, because people will always prefer in person. Some people will prefer to use a fax as opposed to using email. Some people will prefer to use email over some of the social media that we use. And we just keep adding resources, but we're never going to get away from being in people business, and we need to have a facility that meets our needs to do that. And so the post-pandemic world is going to look different, but it's not going to look materially different in that we're going to have a location where members can come and we can provide services to them.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Hey, Brian, earlier you mentioned that we have over 800 employees at TRS. The question that I have is, why do we need that many people to run the system?
So that's a great question, Mr. Nance. And of course, I did try to address that earlier with the slide that was up about the efficiencies that we have as a system. Among our pension peers, TRS's staff to member ratio is among the very lowest in the country. We've always prided ourselves on that. But with the unprecedented growth that we've seen and that we expect to continue to see, we need to add more resources. We need more people on the phones. We need more people visiting with members directly. We need more people processing retirements. We had a huge backlog of processing that occurred at the beginning of the pandemic. And we're still sorting through some of that in certain areas, but we've made some material progress on that by adding additional resources. We are not trying to add resources just for the sake of adding bodies to our headcount. We don't do that. We're looking to add direct member services, or as I mentioned before, adding direct investment staff to invest the fund that will be a benefit to the trust long term. And so, yes, that may seem like a high number to some, but really compared to our peers, we are very modest in terms of our staff size. And we could increase our staff size significantly and still be on the bottom part of that chart. We're not looking to do that. We are actually trying to add resources on a case-by-case basis where they are the most needed. And we're doing that analysis to be careful that we are being prudent, we are prudently using the assets of the trust. And that means not spending money just for the sake of spending money, but adding resources as they're needed and where they're needed to provide the most bang for the buck.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, you talked a little bit about the Red River building earlier. It's a great building, built in the 70s. We own the building. Obviously, we've grown significantly since the building was built, and it served us well. We're talking about a fairly significant layout of dollars for these two new buildings. And you alluded to this a little bit, but I want you to expound just a bit. Wouldn't it cost a whole lot less to just renovate Red River and have that solve the issue for us?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did look very seriously at this very option. As we were looking around for different locations where we could potentially move, we also looked at what could we do here at Red River to make this building accommodate our needs moving forward. And there is a solution. Let me be very clear. There is a solution where we could renovate Red River. We could add to the existing footprint here by building on the surface lots that right now just accommodate members coming and park, putting a parking garage there, putting some additional floors on the existing buildings, building a new building on another part of the surface lot. We could do all of that, but the projected cost is twice the amount of just purchasing a new facility that is outside of downtown and that would be able to accommodate our needs, not have the same constraints that we have here. As I mentioned before, we do have a constraint. We cannot just build up. Even if the folks who come to Austin now comment on the fact that, every other block there's a new high rise, and they're not wrong, but we're one of the blocks that are limited in how high we can go. The buildings that we currently have on our location are at their maximum height. We could probably add one floor to one of the buildings, and that's about it. Because of this capital view restriction, there are capital view corridors all around Austin, which require the Capitol to be seen from certain venues. And we happen to be in line of one of those. And so as a result, we can't build up, we can only build out, we can build down, but that's much more of an expensive proposition than it is to just sell this facility and to purchase something new in a new location outside of downtown that would better serve our members, would be a long-term investment to the fund, and not have those same sorts of issues with construction here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Brian, earlier you mentioned lease costs. This question was, what is TRS paying in leases currently, and are there any others projected?
So thank you, Mr. Nance. Currently, as I mentioned earlier, we have an existing lease at 816 Congress We're currently spending about $5 million per year on that lease in order to house our investment team in that building. That lease expires in March of 2023. It actually expired earlier this year, right before the vaccines came out in March of 2021, or were widely accessible to most of the population. And we renewed the lease for 2 years, knowing that we didn't want to lock ourselves in long term to that lease, but we also wanted to buy ourselves some time while we looked at what the other options might be. We project that if we were to renew in 2023 at 816 or a similar property to house our investment team at that time, the lease cost would increase probably $6 million or more per year, ultimately increasing to $7 million per year in the out years. So we do not necessarily see that as the best and wisest use of the trust fund dollars, which is why we're proposing this solution, which would move the investment team out of that space into a building that we own, and we would no longer have to worry about paying those lease costs.
Oh, thank you.
Well, Brian, you've made the case today as to why the combination of the expensive cost of continuing to lease combined with the cost of the required renovations at Red River are not a good financial option. Having said that, why are we proposing to move into such expensive property? Are there not other options around the city of Austin that will be generational solutions for the system and for our members?
And that's a great question, Mr. Chairman, and it's one that we've spent quite a long period of time evaluating. We did not settle on Miller as our solution overnight. In fact, we spent several years looking at all the various options that were out here in the Austin area. As I mentioned, we looked at just renovating the current Red River location. We looked all around downtown. We looked in North Austin. We looked in South Austin. We looked in East and West Austin. And Austin is a growing town. It is one of the, in terms of economic projections, it is projected to be one of the biggest growers in the state, and as well as in the country. So the real estate market doesn't have a whole lot of options out there for us to consider. As we looked at the various options, however, we realized quickly there are no existing buildings that could house or accommodate our needs long term. We could find facilities that might be able to accommodate our needs for the next couple of years. And I'm not exaggerating, it's a couple of years, but over time, we would quickly outgrow those spaces. We wanted to find a solution where we would have enough space to grow into. And that extra space that we may not need at the beginning, we could always lease out. That's not even part of that economic analysis, but that would also be a benefit to the fund. Bottom line is, in looking at the options, those options were fairly limited, but we did see lots of opportunities, not only in East Austin, but also in South Austin. We looked at some very serious proposals from both locations. Ultimately, however, we settled on the Miller location as the best solution, not only from a timing perspective, because we could move our investment team into a building before their current lease expires, but more importantly, it provided us enough space long term for us to accommodate this need. Now, another question that I get quite frequently, not only from members, but also from legislators, is why Austin? Why not go somewhere else in the state? And the realistic answer is that there are valid business reasons for us to be in the Austin area. First, we are a state agency, we're a state entity, and we need to be close to the state capital. We're often called to testify or provide information to lawmakers. And there's an expectation that during the legislative session and during the non-legislative sessions that we are here and available to our members. In addition, Austin has become the center of institutional investment in Texas. It is one of the primary financial centers. If we were to look to move to another financial center in Texas, it would either be Dallas or Houston. And that would probably be a more expensive option than just staying here in the Austin area. The nice thing about Austin is that there are still opportunities for growth outside of the downtown core. That's why we're moving there. That's why we're proposing to move there today. And that's where the options are. And that's where we believe the best opportunity cost and the best cost benefit for the fund exists. And that's how we're able to bring this proposal and explain it to you and our members today with such an attractive economic benefit at the end of it.
Well, thanks, Brian. So one follow up to that. Many of our state agencies are in state-owned office buildings here in Austin. Is that not an option for us?
Yeah, that's something that we have looked very seriously at. Actually, it's kind of a misnomer. There are a number of state agencies, quite a few actually, that are currently in lease space around Austin.
Okay.
And so a couple of years ago, actually about 5 years ago, the legislature decided that was not a tenable long-term solution. And they authorized the construction of new office space for capital state agencies north of the Capitol. Anyone who's visited the Capitol may see there's a significant construction just north of the Capitol. It's still ongoing. And the space that's being constructed there is for all the agencies that are currently leasing space around town to move into those buildings in the next couple of years. We've talked to the Facilities Commission. We've talked to the state entity that's responsible for that construction. And they've told us there is no additional space for them to build on or for them to offer to us to occupy that could meet TRS's needs. So we did explore that as an option. We just didn't think it was a viable option. And what we've learned from the entity that's controlling that is that we were indeed correct. They don't have enough space. They have barely enough space for the agencies that are moving there. They don't have anything for us. And personally, I think that if we were to pursue such an option, even if it was available, we'd have to think very carefully about it because at the end of the day, the state would own that facility, not us, not TRS. And I think it's very important. TRS has the ability, because it's our trust fund, it's our members' trust fund dollars, that we own and operate our own headquarters and that no one else owns it for us. And so I think that this is why we're here at Red River and why we're proposing to move to a different location where, again, we would own those buildings and they would be part of the trust fund.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Brian.
Brian, our next question from a member is it customary to use pension funds to do this sort of thing?
Yes, Mr. Nance, and that kind of works nicely with my last response. It is. The benefit of using trust fund dollars to purchase a facility that we operate out of is that that facility becomes an asset of the trust. If we were to use state dollars, if we were to use some other method of finance in which we did not end up with ownership at the end of the day, this would not be a valid proposal, in my opinion. It's not the best use of trust fund dollars. It's not the best way to go about our business. Since we have the ability to own our headquarters, we need to continue to take advantage of that capability because it is a long-term benefit to the trust.
That makes great sense. Thank you.
So just to follow up. So if we use money from the trust, Brian, so from the pension trust fund to make this purchase, does that not impair or diminish or damage the financial health of the trust fund?
It does not, Mr. Chairman. Again, bottom line, we are using assets of the trust to purchase a new asset that would be added to the trust. And so it is a one-for-one exchange. Whatever we spend on the new headquarters, the value of that building would then go into the books as an asset to the trust for whatever we spent to purchase it. And it would accrue in value over time. So we would be buying an appreciating asset that not only would be a benefit to the trust, but would also allow us to operate more efficiently and provide better services to our members.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, the next member question is TRS considering opening regional offices in any other parts of the state?
Yes, Mr. Dance, we are. Thank you for that question. During the legislative session and prior, during the sunset review process, we talked about the ability or the possibility of opening a regional office first in El Paso. Now, some people have asked why El Paso, and just think about the size of the state of Texas. We are very geographically diverse. We're one of the largest states in the union in terms of land mass. And what we have found is that we have members in the far-flung regions of the state, particularly El Paso, East Texas, the Valley. All of those are it takes a while to get from there to Austin. And we have a lot of members who never make it to Austin. They want to meet with us in person. And so what we have been doing to date is actually sending counselors there. We will send a group of counselors to El Paso for a week or a 2-week period. We'll set up appointments in advance and we'll try to meet the members' needs kind of on the fly by sending our staff to them. They cannot reach us, and so we go to them. We got authorization this last legislative session to try a pilot office in El Paso. Now, the first question is that going to take away business from the Austin location? And our argument and our belief is that it's not. The vast majority of our members in El Paso, we have quite a few members in El Paso in that area that never make the trip to Austin. And so by having a regional service center to meet their needs, we believe that we're actually serving a currently underserved portion of our population. And so that office in El Paso is projected to open next spring. We're in negotiations with the regional service center in El Paso to provide office space for us to occupy. So we're not going to occupy something new or build something new in El Paso. We're going to use existing education resources in terms of the resource center that's there and use that as our base of operations. We're going to have a modest footprint of 7 to 10 staff providing counseling services to members. We may be doing some phone counseling operations out of there as well. And if that's successful, then we can look at perhaps opening a regional office in other underserved parts of the state. And again, primarily, I would think that the East Texas or the Valley would be the next choice. Even the Panhandle could also be another choice. Some people have already advocated for us to look at opening something in Houston or Dallas or Fort Worth, and those are valid, sort of suggestions. But we believe that it's still a fairly easy drive for most of our members to get from those locations to Austin in a day, and they're not the areas of greatest unmet need. And so we're really hoping that these regional service centers will address members who don't feel like they're getting served by us as well, because of the vast distance between them and us.
Thank you, Brian.
Brian, so, as a board, we know that a plan as extensive as this is, that will cost as much as it does, that is a generational proposed solution, requires a lot of coordination. And one of the things I know the board has asked you and the staff to do is to ensure that we are as transparent as possible, that we are communicating with our members as much as possible about this proposal. I think we've done that so far, as evidenced by today's Facebook Live. I know I've hosted a meeting with representatives of each of the associations. What have we done to inform our members of the legislature about what we're proposing and what you're going to present to the board in September for approval?
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we have been working actively to engage all the members of the legislature on this proposal to make sure that they and their constituents are aware of what we're proposing. As you mentioned, this has been a lengthy multi-year process. We have provided updates to the legislature along the way, but we really kicked things into overgear this summer when it looked like we were reaching a point where the board was going to make a decision. And so we alerted all of the members of the legislature. We visited with either the elected officials personally or their staffs when they weren't available to provide all the information we can, all the information we're sharing with you today about this proposal so that everyone can go into this decision with eyes wide open, knowing exactly what's expected, knowing exactly what it's going to cost, and what the economic rationale for the plan may be. And so we've had very successful engagement with legislative members. We will continue that. Based upon today's call and the feedback that we received from members in this Facebook Live event, we are going to continue to engage members, keep them up to date, And as we get closer to the September board meeting and have more definitive information about the actual proposal, what the specific cost will be, what exactly the board will be considering in September in terms of, not as much of a range, but more specific numbers. We're going to provide that not only to our members, but also to the legislature to make sure that they are all fully informed.
Thank you.
Brian, some of our members may be hearing about long-term facility planning for the first time today. Has this been discussed publicly, and could you kind of review us on how we got to where we are today?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Nance. So when we started having this discussion, it was actually with prior the trustees who were no longer on the board in many cases back in 2014, and we would have those discussions in public settings in the board meeting, which are recorded and posted on our website. We continue to have those discussions for a period of time. We actually then decided at the end of 2016 to put those efforts on hold for a period of time while we waited to see what really happened in terms of development in the specific area where Red River is located. A lot of activity has happened since then. There's been a new hospital, or the old hospital that was there, Brackenridge, was torn down. The new hospital is under construction. It's becoming sort of a medical facility area. And we believe that by waiting, we actually enhance the value significantly of the Red River property by waiting, because this has become a very attractive property for perhaps a life science center or someone else who's in medical technology who would want to be available as a resource to those new state resources that are being constructed just north of us. But that being said, we've talked about this in public, in board meetings, at every opportunity. And when we brought this issue back to light just about 2 years ago, when we started this current effort, we've had routine meetings where we've talked about this in public settings and provided as much information as we can to the members of the public as well as to the legislature about what our plans are. And we will continue to be as forthright and transparent moving forward to make sure that everyone is fully informed and engaged on what we're doing.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Hopefully, many of our members were able to access this live. We'll watch the recording as well. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Brian, for your forthright questions. Trustee Nance, for joining me in hosting this today. But unfortunately, we're out of time. A couple of points I want to make to our members before we sign off. First, we are fully committed to being open and honest with you about this decision. We're going to do everything we can, as we have in the past, to provide all up-to-date and current information on this proposal as we progress through this decision. We know many of you may have other questions. If we didn't get to them today, please take advantage of the variety of ways which you can continue to submit questions and comments. We've actually set up a special email address on the TRS website. And you can always, of course, reach us through the Contact with Texans page on the website and provide questions and comments. The next step, everyone, in this process will take place on September 17th, when me and my fellow trustees will fulfill our fiduciary duty by making a decision that is in the best interest of the fund today and in the future for the fund as well as our members. We encourage you to watch the live webcast of our meeting or to access it on demand from the website following the meeting. Again, thanks everyone for joining us today.